Hi, I'm Matthew Chunk from Work in Fintech. I'm the founder of Work in Fintech. I'm also CEO of a fintech firm called iPushPull and co-founder of another firm called New Squawk. And what I want to do in these episodes is teach you all about fintech. So today we're joined by Amrit Katkar, who is a master's student studying computer science at the University of Birmingham. And we're delighted to welcome James Tromans, who's the technical director of the Office of the CTO at Google Cloud. So let's kick off. James, good to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, fantastic. Let's start off with some of your own background in fintechs and startups. You did create your own startup a few years ago called Trade Chase, a financial trading game. Can you just talk about that and what led you down that path and did it work out? What did you learn from it? And then I'll hand over to Amrit, who's got a ton of questions for you.
Yeah, perfect. Well, yeah, Trade Chase feels like a long time ago now, but it was a great period of my career and my life. So, I mean, really, it was me and a friend at university. We spent a lot of time chatting, and we're both quite entrepreneurial. I'd started a couple of companies prior as well. And Trade Chase came about really with the confluence between gamification, a growing interest in retail finance, and sort of how to bring those things together in a way that was very accessible for people. And so when we started the company, we kicked around a whole bunch of different ideas, but we didn't really have much of a quantitative financial background at the time. And the original idea of the company was to do something called pool betting, which is exactly how poker works, if you're familiar with that, right? So the idea that a bunch of people come together, they say put up £1 or £10 or £100 each into the pot, and they would trade for some period of time. And at the end of the trading period, using virtual money but real market data, they would, whoever has the highest value portfolio would win the pool, right? So you might be given a $10 million portfolio to manage, and you can buy and sell currencies and shares and commodities. But it doesn't matter if you all lose money. Whoever loses the most money wins the pool. So it's a really nice idea. And for various reasons, we actually pivoted that business into what ended up being an options trading platform. And we didn't even know about Black-Scholes at the time. We were really like green in that regard. And so we sort of came up with our own pricing and interesting ways to think about hedging, and kind of learned the hard way. And eventually, it was time for me to try something new. And I left that business, and it continued to run for a number of years afterwards. But I met some amazing people, many people I've worked with since in my other roles. One person actually had worked with me in my company prior. So it was a great time. It was about 3 years, funding, office space. Actually, we shared an accelerator space at the university with a company called Onfido that's gone on to do very, very well in terms of identity. So it's a good group of folks that we met along the way, and very enjoyable.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting startup, and it obviously helped guide your path in investment banking at Citi. But, you mentioned you had an early interest in software, and I think you actually had some ventures in that prior to university. What drove you to choose experimental psychology at the University of Oxford, given your sort of previous interest in more traditional STEM subjects, such as sort of computer science?
Yeah, great question. To know the answer to that, really, I think you need to know my background even before university. I think both my parents worked at IBM. They were IBMers. I was introduced to computers very young, building computers very young. I remember, hacking the memory on a Sega Mega Drive using Action Replay cartridge and that sort of thing when I was, a child. And I was always quite interested in how computers worked, and learned hexadecimal just as well as I knew base 10. So I kind of was always very technical, and I did computing A level, maths, economics, English as well. But when I thought about university, I thought, well, I could study computer science, but I was really interested in how the mind worked, more from a neurophysiological standpoint, but also from a behavioral standpoint. I really enjoyed learning like child developmental psychology, for example. I had part of a term learning about that. So I sort of fell into it in the sense that I couldn't really think of something else I wanted to do more. And I was very interested in vision and how we learn to see. And despite psychology maybe seeming quite a social subject, at Oxford it's a hard science, right? To study it, you have to have a kind of a scientific background. And the course in the first year is primarily maths and statistics, neuroscience, and then psychology itself. So it's, you're not getting away from the biochemistry of it all. You're having to learn that as well. So it's a pretty scientific subject, I would say.
And so you sort of mentioned the behavioral elements. You often hear about how important STEM is in the world of investment banking and tech. Within your degree, what elements sort of helped you later on in life? Was it the logical thinking aspects of the behavioral science, or was it the actual mechanical elements within hard programming and that type of thing?
Well, I would say it was a great subject for me personally because it forced us to learn to write very well and write a lot. So your written communication skills had to be very good. For example, 2 or sometimes 3 essays every week, approximately 2, maybe 3,000 words, which sounds very much like almost like English literature, right? But at the same time, you're learning statistics and you're doing a science, so it's very reference based, it's very quantitative. And so if you go and talk to mathematicians, they're doing papers and no writing. And if you go and talk to someone who's studying, history or even law, they're doing a lot of writing. Sort of this degree was somewhere in the middle, and I actually felt that was very that suited me very well because it gave me both the qualitative and the quantitative type of education that I really valued. So now I can, write technical documents quite quickly, for example, and I find that very straightforward compared to someone who perhaps didn't have as much writing background. So it suits that sort of analytical way of thinking, blending quantitative and qualitative together very well.
Yeah, no, it's interesting you say that. I think at present, if you look at sort of investment banking and tech again, STEM is mentioned quite heavily, but some of those sort of qualitative and quantitative skills in sort of summation are really important. Do you think a tech degree is necessary to work in some of these fields at the moment?
No, no. I mean, I think can be helpful. I think at the end of the day, there's different ways to think about education. I think there's the things you learn during your degree which can be directly applied to the thing that you want to do thereafter. So if you want to be a software engineer, obviously doing a degree that involves an element of software engineering is going to give you a head start. But at the same time, a large part of your university degree is learning to learn. Some of us are lucky enough to kind of get that a bit earlier in our education, but really at uni, it's the one thing you have to do. No one's going to help you out, right? You're kind of on your own. And I think that it's that sort of being inquisitive and being passionate to learn new things is a trait that you often see within software engineers, right? They always want to know the latest frameworks. They always want to know the latest technology. And I think that goes with technical people more broadly. Like they like to keep on top of their fields and they're inquisitive. So whilst I don't think you need a technology degree, I think it can help. But at the same time, I think if you come from history, as long as you like to learn and you're apply yourself, you can easily pick up the appropriate skills needed to get into fintech and even more core banking as well. I've seen that happen. So it's more about the person's appetite to keep learning than it is about anything else.
Really, really interesting insights. The best example of that is your sort of background. You developed Trade Chase. It was an entrepreneurial venture. It sort of highlighted your interest in both the software side of things and also, as you mentioned, sort of finance. When transitioning from Trade Chase to investment banking, what was that transition like, and why did you end up choosing data science route within investment banks?
Sure. Well, I didn't join as an outright data scientist. It took me a while to navigate my way to that role, shall we say. When I first joined Citi, it was a bit serendipitous, actually. So obviously, having recently come off the back of co-founding a startup and doing fundraising and building my network on that side of the fence, a friend of mine who was starting a venture capital company at the time was interested to know how, process works, and he was doing an MBA at Oxford, and we kept in touch, and he rang me up and was sort of like, how's things, a bit of small chat. It's like, I've got a friend who is looking for someone with your background, specifically neural networks, and I'd obviously done a PhD in computational neuroscience, which was a natural progression, like the intersection between psychology, neuroscience, and computing. And so I was sort of interested and said, timing's kind of interesting because I've just spoken with my co-founder over the last couple of months, and I'm thinking of doing something else. It couldn't have been more lucky. It was like, it's a family friend, why don't you just meet them? So I went and met this chap, really nice guy, went down to Canary Wharf, hadn't really been there all that much before. And we had a chat, and he sort of listened to what I'd been up to, and I explained a mixture of my startup and my academic background. And he got really excited around the sort of more quantitative neural network side of things. And this was fairly early on in terms of neural networks, sort of 2013 maybe. And one thing led to another. He thought it sounded good, and I then did the sort of 4 or 5 interviews at Citi at the time, and joined as a contractor, not as a permanent hire. And I spent the first 9 months building sort of a mixture of a sort of quantitative time series engine for analyzing data, with an eye to using that as the bedrock to building a bunch of neural network related modeling work thereafter. And I did an okay job at showing what could be possible. This was before HTML5 and so on was as popular as it is today. So I sort of demonstrated that. And I actually was lucky enough, many things in life with your careers is taking the opportunities presented to you. When I was sitting on the trading floor working in this role, I was sat next to the then global head of currency trading technology at Citi. And, we sort of kept to ourselves for the first few months, but over time you get chatting and we overhear each other's conversations. And he sort of gave me what I would consider like a bit of a break. He took an interest in my skill set and asked me to join his management team as a permanent employee. And that was really how I got into Citi. It sort of wasn't particularly forethought or planned. It was sort of took a job that sounded really interesting, did a good job, was sat next to someone who was hiring, senior guy, asked me to join. I said yes. And then I started more on the risk side. So lots of jobs in financial technology and capital markets. People have been running risk systems. It's kind of bread and butter for a long time and having good careers running risk. And so I sort of started taking on some of those responsibilities. And by the end of my period, in that kind of stage of my time at Citi, I was sort of running all of the front office risk systems for the currency and short-term rates interest trading business, and did that for a number of years and enjoyed it immensely. A mixture of legacy systems that were sort of 15, 20 years old through to greenfield systems that I sort of orchestrated and drove, using modern technology, Storm, which came from Twitter. We used FPGAs, which is a form of accelerated hardware. And eventually I decided to take a shift and go into data science, and I'd become very close to the trading business itself during that time. So I actually moved out of technology and into the trading business, still doing more of a technical role. I never was outright owning P&L myself or trading, but helping and guiding those that were. So I sat on the FX management team, and that's how I ended my career at Citi, working there. So I kind of saw both sides of the house in terms of front office and capital markets, the technology side and the trading side, and I loved it. I loved working there. I would highly recommend Citi to anyone, and I'm still very close to a number of people there.
Yeah, I think 2 or 3 things really, really stood out to me there. And it was, you mentioned taking opportunities in your networks and your exposure to different parts of the business. You accelerated your career quite fast over the sort of 6 years that you were there. How did you continue to ensure that you stood out from the crowd in such a high-pressured and saturated industry at times?
Well, I mean, I kind of didn't try in particular. I just did my own thing to a certain extent, right? So I very much brought my entrepreneurial mindset, which is, whilst I wouldn't consider myself an outright software engineer, I'm certainly not writing code enough to do that. I mean, software engineering is a craft, right? So you have to hone your craft constantly to keep it up. But I was able to build prototypes and show things, and I'm a maker at heart. And obviously prior to TradeChase, I worked as a software engineer for a long time, ever since I was a teenager. And so I just took those skills and took that entrepreneurial mindset. And if I couldn't get someone else to do something that I needed doing, I just did it. And obviously within reason, I wasn't going to, break things, but I was just going to kind of get on with it, right? And relatively quickly that paid dividends. I think, I was lucky to have a really good manager in the form of Neil Boston. And he valued that kind of initiative and sought out that type of person. And from there, I like people managing. I like blending people management with technology, and I like looking after people's careers and getting the best out of people. So I was able to sort of bring some of my founder skills of building teams to Citi, and I just kind of treated it a bit like my own company inside a big organization that had good funding. And I was lucky enough to have line management that wanted to fund the things I was enrolled to do, rather than defund. Priorities change all the time, so my timing was good. And I think that you mentioned high pressure environment. I mean, working in front office technology in a bank is high pressured, but it's not outrageous, you know. I mean, the working hours were very reasonable. You know, a lot of people sort of work 8, 9 hour days, not crazy. And some people work 11 if they want to, but you're not working like 12, 13, 14 hour days, day in, day out or anything like that, right? It's much more amenable. And when it comes to the way I managed my teams when I was there, you know, some of the best engineers I had preferred to work, you know, a very clean 8 hour day, but when they were on it, they were on it, and the quality of code, you know, spoke for itself. They didn't need to work the longer hours to be productive. So I think that the times are changing in banking generally, where the idea of like killing yourself working the crazy hours, I've just not seen that during my time. Whenever there's an issue, of course you have to step up. I mean, that's part of being in a salaried role, which is well paid. You know, you have to, when the tough gets going, you're expected to be there, but that's not happening all the time, right? So
Yeah, and I think so. One of the sort of interesting things you mentioned in your sort of over the past couple of questions is the time when you started, the perception of data, the role that data played was very different to how it is now. You sort of hear these buzzwords, AI, machine learning, neural networking, quite frequently. You worked over that evolution and you saw some of that change. What does AI machine learning look like in an investment bank, and how did you manage that curve of progression?
So it can look very different depending on which part of the bank you're in. One of the things that I say to my colleagues at Google now is, you know, when we think about banks as customers to Google Cloud, it's not a good idea to think of them as one business, because consumer banking is very different to investment banking. And within investment banking, you know, M&A is very different to capital markets. And so I would say, you know, seeing those for what they are is important. And I would say the type of technology that you see in the sharp end of capital markets can be quite different to what you would see elsewhere, and the rate of adoption and so on, including the people and the types of people. So, you know, over my time at Citi, data was always seen as important, but the impetus to do more with data had grown significantly. And again, it comes down to certain individuals. I think Citi was lucky to have, you know, a new head of FX trading, who now runs FX, you know, trading and sales globally, who really valued technology and data and wanted to do more with it, and saw AI as a way to help empower his staff and his workforce to do more, right? Because it's difficult to grow a business through only people. It's much easier to grow a business through using technology. And you know, banks like Citi, JP Morgan, and a number of others, they have data that no one else has. And so they're in a unique position to find ways to monetize that data, you know, safely and soundly. And so I think that, you know, a lot of organizations, banks included, are on that journey right now. And there's a lot of talk around how if you get your data sorted, you can then go on to do machine learning and AI. But of course, which comes first? You'll often need a use case to justify cleaning the data, and you get into that conversation. But no one's really suggesting that data itself is not important. Sometimes I see conversations around, do we really need to store everything forever? Because obviously old data is a lot less value than new data. So you see those types of conversations sometimes, but the jury is convinced now that the data is extremely valuable.
And so I think you mentioned the quality of data and data silos within these sort of big institutions can mean they're slightly behind the rest of the pack. Does fintech help fill that void? These companies that have a sole focus on producing a product that is suited to meet a specific need?
I think so, absolutely. I think the reality is, like, if you're a large bank or even, you know, just a larger organization, the amount of legacy that you carry, which isn't necessarily anyone's fault, it's just the reality of being around a long time, it does slow you down. And if you think about how budgeting in any organization works, there's an element of money that's proportioned to running the bank, and there's an element of money that's proportioned to building the bank. And you know, depending on that ratio, whether the majority of your money is heavily in favor of just running the bank versus how much money you have to, like, you know, rationalize, clean up, and do greenfield projects, you know, that's an important thing to have to balance and manage. And if you don't look after your systems and let them become legacy, then of course you're going to be maintaining that legacy, and you may not be seen to be adding value. And that's where fintechs can come in, because they're smaller, they move quicker, decisions are made faster, and they're not, most importantly, they're not using legacy technology. And I make this point a lot when I talk to senior folks in banking. The idea that you need to hire a team of 20 PhDs to go and build you a custom model, yes, there are very small niches for that, but for the most part, right, the time it takes you to take some open source software, spin something up on the cloud, try an idea and turn it back down. Even 5 years ago in a bank, you'd have had to rack and stack new hardware. It might have taken 3, 6, 9 months, right? You'd have to get a risk exception potentially if that hardware was unusual for your data center. And then once you've done all of that, you've had to have written a bunch of code to try it, and it may not have even worked. So the cost of failure, where failure is completely normal, you need to fail to try new things, was very high. And I think that the reality now is that fintechs who are maybe cloud native or have the ability to containerize their workflows to either run on premise at their customers, like i.e. banks, or run in various cloud providers, are able to just move so much faster because they're solving a very specific problem. And I think banks have to work out where they want to focus their resource and their revenue. What is their business, and what do they want to own, and what do they want to buy? And so fintechs can support that by solving some of the problems that they don't want to own, basically.
Do you think it's very much the convergence actually of fintech, or actually the cloud being an enabler? Because from my perspective, being in a fintech firm, and I guess you're on the other side being a cloud provider, cloud has really taken off in a big way in the last couple of years. It's been around for a long, long time, but for me, it feels like it's been this tanker ship turning very slowly, maybe about 3-4 years ago. And then it's getting, the rate of change is getting a lot quicker. And then now we're nearly at the point where it's kind of full steam ahead and everything is on the cloud. And that really has accelerated, exactly like you said, it's lowered the cost of entry for an idea and an investment bank, or just for someone to create a startup. Can you kind of talk about, for the people listening who aren't as familiar around kind of the cloud landscape, kind of what that looks like and why it's so important as we move ahead?
Yeah, completely agree. I think you said it very well. You're right, cloud's been around a long time. I think not everyone appreciates that. I mean, even my startup, sort of 2010 or 11, we were on Azure, right? Really way back in the day. And we were a regulated business as well. We were regulated by the UK Gambling Commission, full license for pool betting. Yes, we had to work around the cloud element to a certain extent, which I won't bore you with, but we were for the most part using cloud. And since then, cloud has continued to evolve, and you sort of see 3 main hyperscalers in the West. You have Ali Cloud, of course, as well. And that has completely changed the way companies can do business, because they don't have the big capital expenditure outlay on their balance sheet, and they can just pay for what they use. That's the core, original value proposition of cloud computing, right? You just don't have to wait to spin up a machine. It's right there. You can configure it on the fly, and then you can do what you want with it, and then turn it off if you're not using it to save money, and then turn it back on immediately when you do. Cloud's obviously moved a lot since the early days, right? It's less about infrastructure, and it's a lot more about the service. And I think Google's main differentiator is what can we do from a service perspective by bringing the best of Google's internal technology to customers. And of course, if you're a fintech that can take some of your own special magic IP and secret sauce, blend it with the power of what Google has already built, whether that's TensorFlow, whether that's Kubernetes, whether that's BigQuery, which is a fantastic analytics database. And from there, you can bring your domain expertise in the industry that you're solving for with your own special sauce. You can just do things that would never have been possible without cloud, at least not in the amount of time and not with such little money. And that enables these types of companies to solve problems quickly, and actually, if it's not working, pivot faster as well, right? With less cost. And you can listen to the market, you can listen to your customer demand, and you can roll with it in a way that I don't think was possible prior to cloud computing. I think a lot of people see Google as the AI and data cloud, which is absolutely correct. We're extremely strong in those areas. But they forget that we invented Kubernetes. They forget that we were one of the original creators of managing compute in that way. And so we actually have a really great offering there. And companies that make use of containerization in this way, it's really nice for them to be able to deploy on premise, because in fintech, a lot of the banks want to run some stuff locally on premise. They don't want to put everything in the cloud all the time, at least not yet. And that's partly, to your point, we're seeing that adoption at that point of the hockey stick. I totally agree with you. More and more large financial services organizations are adopting cloud. Google named references that are in the press. It's Goldman Sachs talk about the stuff they're doing with GCP. Deutsche Bank are talking about the stuff they're doing with GCP. HSBC are talking about the stuff they're doing. And I think that, we're seeing that adoption. There's obviously more to come. There's more progress for everyone to make. But until everyone's cloud native, there will be a situation where running on-prem through containers is a really, really good idea. And so I think it's that blend of technology on-premise and cloud that's enabling fintechs to move really quickly right now.
That's really interesting insights. One of the really interesting things that graduates in this area find is they have an interest in AI, machine learning, and sort of cloud computing, but they don't know how to apply themselves in that area. How would you sort of guide a student to try and utilize as many of the softwares available to build their knowledge and help themselves in the industry?
Yeah, well, I think to Matthew's point at the beginning, you don't have to be crazy technical to try something anymore, right? So as long as you're sort of interested in technology and can kind of find your way around, you don't have to be writing code to build something anymore, right? Like, you might need to write a little bit of SQL, which I guess is code, but not complicated SQL. You just a little bit of like database queries, like maybe pull some data back. But, to give you an example, if you want to learn how to make progress and you're sort of interested in an idea and what it might look and feel like, you can, for $20, go onto a cloud platform. You can go onto GCP. You could, upload an Excel spreadsheet into a database, and then right from that database, doing almost nothing, sort of just using a GUI in your mouse, you could build an ML model to see if you can predict a particular column, right? And maybe that's data that you've generated through yourself, through collecting data. Maybe that's data you've got from different places and you're combining it in a novel way. But gone are the days where you needed to have a whole PhD to build a state-of-the-art machine learning model to do a classification. Is this fraud? Is this not fraud? Or a regression? Is the price going to go up by how much? Is the price going to go down by how much? A lot of that is now available without having to be an outright software engineer. You can sort of be more of a business analyst. And so I think if you're a student and you're interested in cloud, or you're interested in AI, or interested in how these things can help with fintech, the best thing to do is to try it, right? Like, have the idea, but then, go and play around with a platform, right? It's not, firstly, you can pretty much get free credit on most of the cloud platforms to try. And if you then want to actually do something beyond your free credit, if it's reasonable, you're really talking dollars or pounds. You're not talking hundreds of dollars and hundreds of pounds to try something. And so I'm really supportive of people who just want to get their hands dirty and have no idea what they're doing and just read and try and read and try. And that's the best way to sort of formulate a feeling. And of course, if you're not a technical person, but you've got a good idea and you kind of tried something out, it looks like it might have some legs. And that's why you get a technical co-founder and you say, look, this is what I've tried. Could you maybe make this a little more real for me? What do you think?
Are those type of skills, do you think, useful for our listeners who might want to get a job at Google Cloud or in some of the places you've worked at? The idea of trying to differentiate yourself in I suppose, in your CV. For example, you could be bug fixing software for a fintech firm, or you could build something on some open source software, or you could just have a play with something, for example. Is there anything like that you could kind of recommend to people who are starting out and looking to make the step into this direction career-wise?
So, every hiring manager is different, and there are certain roles, if you're going to work in a well-established fintech, that might have 50 people or 100 people, or, certainly a bank, there will be roles where you need specific skills, right? If you're going to go and be a JavaScript developer, you need to know JavaScript, and the best way to know JavaScript is to practice writing JavaScript. But it's always good to practice on a problem that's sort of exciting and real, rather than just do the theory. So one of the things that I look for, me personally as a hiring manager, I almost skip to it on a CV. I'll skip over the job experiences and come back to it, and I'll almost skip over the education as well and then come back to it. I'll look for, are they doing any side projects? Do they have in their CV, I work on this GitHub project in my spare time, I'm a maintainer of this project in my spare time, or I do something, it doesn't have to be software engineering, I do something else that's interesting and technical in a way in my spare time. And if I find that on the CV, I'll be honest, like I'll then spend a lot more time reading through the work experience and the other qualifications because I'm finding myself interested in the person. I'll try and give every CV equal, measure and equal read through. Of course I will, but I'll be really excited by that extra little bit of like self-initiative around things that I think are relevant for the job. And for me, it demonstrates self-learning and continued learning. And I think that's really important. We certainly value continued learning at Google, that's for sure.
Listen, James, it'd be remiss of us not to talk about your time at Google. What drove the decision to go from working in investment banking to Google? I think the outside perception is that the cultures are very different. The sort of objectives and the pressures are very different. Is that true? And what sort of drove that decision to work there?
Well, so firstly, I would say, linked to my point earlier about working in a place like Citi, I loved working there. I found the culture to be fantastic. All my managers were fantastic, and almost without exception, my peers were high quality, nice people to work with. So, I would imagine that there'll be other parts of different banks where that's not the case, right? So I can't speak, for outside of my areas, but for the most part, I think the culture was really good there, and the work was very interesting. What led me to want to work at Google was I wanted to go and work at a big tech and get some experience working in a big tech, but also, I was always a strong advocate for cloud at Citi, and I did a number of projects in that area. And I just love cloud computing. I love the way it can change business models. I love the empowerment that it can bring to the everyday person can now truly start a technology company in a way that just wasn't possible before. So it supports the sort of entrepreneurial spirit within me. So I wanted to get experience working in a big tech, and I couldn't think of a better place to do it than at Google Cloud because it was in a field, in an industry that was growing. And the role was very different to the roles that I've done before, right? So most of my career has been building teams in technology to solve for both product and engineering, to solve for specific challenges. Whereas this was back to being an individual contributor, so removing the overhead of managing teams, thinking performance reviews and budget planning and location strategy, and focusing much more on the most important problems that Google Cloud has and our customers have, and sitting in that nexus between product, longer term product, like what's going on in the outside world around Google Cloud and how Google Cloud needs to think about that. And of course, what do our customers need? And sort of sitting in that CTO office, enables me to learn some new skills and be in a team, which by the way is, I'll probably never be in a team like it, right? It's full of people that are incredibly accomplished at what they do, both coming from within Google and industry. And it's a team that, frankly, only a company like Google can really attract and keep. So it's a real privilege to be part of this team, and it's just an opportunity for me to learn something different and try something different. I can always go back into managing large organizations in the future, but I can't always join a team like the one I'm part of at Google Cloud.
And so I guess some of the similarities and differences there are the applications of the work you're doing, and the similarities are the entrepreneurial side of things, I guess, is present in both Google and Citi. Is there any sort of stark differences beyond that, or does that sort of cover the basis?
No, I think, there is a big difference, which I haven't mentioned, and it's not necessarily a negative, but in banking, trading in my case, that's the business. And the technology is doing everything that it can to improve and support and make trading better. But technology is not the business. Trading is the business. And so you have to be very interested in trading and financial markets and have an underlying interest, I think, to really get the most out of your job and really enjoy yourself. Of course, you don't have to know every intricacy. You can still just write code or be a program manager or a product manager. But if you like the markets, then being a technologist in that is really rewarding. The difference at Google is, for the most part, technology itself is the business, right? And so the more technology that you can build, the better quality technology that you can build, it's going to impact more and more people, more and more customers. The scale that you have at Google when you build technology, especially if you're in like Google Core, if you want to think of it as separate to Google Cloud, then, of course, it's a different value proposition in that regard. But I get to, at Citi, go and talk to my users and my customers every day. At Google, you don't necessarily get quite the same experience. It's a different experience. It's not worse, it's just different. You obviously get to have a massive impact if you're building products that touch billions of people. So Google Cloud is kind of an interesting in the middle, because you get an element of that Googliness. Of course you do, you're at Google, but you're also working with specific customers on specific problems. And so, there is some difference there. But it's not that one's better than the other. It's just different.
So I think, James, we'll kind of head into the end here, and if we're looking at, from talking to you, kind of what it sounds like has made you successful is you've kind of brought this convergence of kind of people skills to technology. You're always learning and always kind of pushing boundaries in that sense, and being quite proactive, and just getting yourself out there and trying things. Sounds to me, from what you've been saying, is some of the things that's helped your success. Is there anything you'd like to add to that? And also, if you were to go back to your kind of 18-year-old self, is there any words of wisdom you'd like to give yourself?
So, I mean, I don't know how successful I am, relatively speaking, but I think that you've articulated well the things that have probably led me to where I am currently. If I had to go back to my 18-year-old self, I don't think I'd give myself any sort of earth-shattering advice. I think I'd remind myself to do the things that make me happy. I've never, for example, chased one thing above another. For example, I'm never just going to chase compensation over enjoying the work, but at the same time, I'm never going to do a job that makes my family destitute. So, I think sticking to jobs that you really enjoy and you would like going into work every day is the most important thing. And I'm fortunate that I've always enjoyed the jobs that I've done, and I've always enjoyed going into work every day. And when things start to get boring, if you do well in your roles, ordinarily any company is going to try and find you a role that's going to stretch you to your next thing, to the next thing you want to do. And I was fortunate enough to experience that at Citi, and I've done that for myself prior to Citi. And I think companies like Google and almost all of the large tech companies, they're big enough that as you get good at one role and you want to try something new, people who are good at what they do are often looking for the next challenge, and they have various roles. So, for me, it would just be, keep focusing on doing things that you enjoy, and good ideas come to people who are minds are open and minds are being creative. So if you're entrepreneurial and you enjoy fintech and that's your bag, then the good ideas will come. And if you stick to enjoying what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, it will make all the difference, because when you're happy, you'll do better work.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, James. So we'll wrap that up. So this is Work in Fintech, interviewing James Tromans from Google Cloud. Thank you.